thanks for the invitation. And you have heard the blames on the permission system in Sweden. So I will try to explain how it works today and what's in the pipeline. And traditionally, I work for the small governmental agency growth policy analysis under Ministry of Enterprise and Innovation. But presently, I've borrowed for do this inquiry related to the mining process mainly, and also the sustainable supply of innovation critical metals and minerals, which means that we also look into mining waste, but also into how it creates circularity. But the focus actually is on the mining side. And Philip was showing one version of these figures, and it comes from the EU. So this is a high topic on the EU level, but it's also a high topic on the Swedish level, and it's related to that we, in the green transition, and Europe as well as Sweden, we want to be a driver in this transition and see a competitive advantage through our greenness compared, for example, compared to China, compared to United States, compared to Australia, that we have the possibility to do this a slightly more sustainable way. But then we need also these metals. And this creates problems, since most of them, as Philip was saying, is processed, at least in China. And few of them is also mined in China, but most of them is also imported to China. And the production of them is very small, negligible in Europe. And we need new mines to meet this and make this transition. And it's related to the transition to renewable energy, it's electrification of transport, but as well to industrial electrification, and also for digitalization solutions related to autonomous vehicles and the transition to circular economy, which means circular business models. And mainly what we discussed here is metals which is not used so much in the society so far, like graphite, cobalt, lithium, rare earth elements, vanadium, and so forth. But it also related to traditional base metals like copper and iron ore to make these transitions. So we need new mines, and we are worried about the Chinese dominance. But as I mentioned, it's not only about security of supply and the Chinese dominance on the market side. It's also related that we want a transition which relates also to mental part and climate and social security and social impact, as well as economic, that we have to deal with. And we can see in Europe and as well in some other countries, like in the finance sector, the ESG ratings, but also in legislation on EU level, that we have a huge focus on how companies produce the products in a sustainable way, but also reporting about them, including the whole value chains. So even if you're a branding company, you have to deal with your suppliers today. And it can be, for example, for a reporting system based on due diligence, which is on the way in the European Union. And this puts pressure on the whole system that we can actually achieve this also. And many times, actually, one of the biggest, especially if you produce products, you find these risks in the mining side of this change, supply change. And unfortunately, what you can see is, I turn a little bit more into the permit process, is that in the permit process, you have a rather weak actual understanding how your business actually is working here. You can see that we need these methods for this transition, but you don't understand how this works from the business side. And personally, I try to a few times explain it like it's like research, that you start with many different experiments. Most of them actually is failures, and then you end up a few concepts which you realize that this will look into a little bit more, and finally you might find one concept, one out of, from the beginning it might be in tens of thousands of investigations from the beginning, and you will find one concept which might, you can see this will be economically profitable. For a mine, this is when you are in your business now. In Kallak, in Voxna, you are in this position that you can see that you can do business from this. And from a permitting process, you need to understand that the business cycle works in this sense, that you have a lot of examples from the beginning, and you end up in a position that you have one of these actually where you can do business from it. And this means that traditional system you build up it in from permit side below here, that you have exploration permit lecture that you can start to look into this, and after many years and many failures, you might turn up and try to find an extraction permit. And in most mining regions, this includes at least that you have shown that, and the government have seen that you have an profitable deposit to mine from. And in Sweden, we also have included that we also discuss the land use issues in the extraction permit. And there we also get into a problem, because when we are here in Sweden, extraction permit, we have to agree between the Bergsstaten and the Länsstyrelsen, the Country Administrative Board, that they come to the same conclusion. Otherwise, you end up to the government to decide, because which historically have worked. Because if you have land use difficult to the late different land issues between, for example, Samis against the mine. Of course, that is a political decision, but if they can't decide, it's blocked. And to be an attractive mine, then it's related actually to the institutional framework, that you have taxes and fees which are competitive, that you have a permit process which are transparent and trustworthy, that you have a natural acceptance, which actually you have in Sweden, but also local acceptance. And there you find weaknesses in Sweden, but as well in most other mining countries. They actually have problems with local acceptance, not in my backyard. But also attractiveness is related to that actually have a good physical deposit, or good input factors like the energy cost, access to good labor, infrastructure, and so forth. And from the Swedish side, we have built up a system which actually from the beginning have worked pretty well in this process. That we have built up a position that where we can support the companies on the way. That we have an exploration permit, extraction permit, which results in that the companies get more money because they just have the extraction permit and it's worth something. And finally it ends up in an environmental permit process and we might have a mine. And we also have, related to this, pretty low taxes and fees on mines, which means that if you have a mine in work, in progress, it's pretty good to be in Sweden. But we have more and more problems in the first phase actually to create new mines. And what we have heard before, I have mentioned the word valley of death. And it's actually related to the discussion after Norra Kärr, when it ends up that you actually need a Natura 2000 permission to create a new mine in Sweden, if it's required, because it's not in all places you need a Natura 2000 permission. So, but if you need one, you shall do it to receive an extraction permit. And this means that you actually need all information how your actual business will impact indirectly the environment. Norra Kärr, you mentioned a few kilometers away, but it can be even far away. That you have the water going out into the ground and be transported into rivers, which might turn out to be a Natura 2000 area. Then you have an impact. And then you have to analyze how you really impact this. And then you need to have all the knowledge how your mining will work, where you have all your factories and so forth, and so you actually what you ends up in that you have come into a situation where you instead before you were supposed to have an extraction permit and you attract more money, you need to do almost in the same time the environmental permit application and the application for an extraction permit. This means that you need much more money in an early stage to actually do this work because it's costly. And this also results in an increased risk of bankruptcy of these companies. So this is the situation today. But the good thing, at least for you, which likes mines, is the decision from Riksdag. It was for the opposition actually, going over the Socialdemokraterna and Mental Party, that they have decided that this Natura 2000 should move into the mental permit process instead and should be handled there. So you have this decision. And what happens now is that the government have to change the law. So they're supposed to give a suggestion how to change the law that actually you can follow this decision. And they should give a proposal in June next year. If they do so, I don't know, because they have not started the work yet. It might turn out that I, in my inquiry, have to do with this, but we shall be finished in October and not in June. So, but today we don't know, actually. But at least the Riksdag have decided that this shall happen. And this will change the permit process.
Sorry, back, Tobias, we need your second mic here. So, could you handle it like that?
Yes, of course. And this increase and going back to the historic situation pretty much, because we still have huge problems in the permit process in Sweden. And partly it's driven by the EU legislation related to Natura 2000, but also the Water Framework Directive, that mines have always impact on water, which means that we will have difficulties to meet actually what this directive is requiring. So this will be problematic. We can see it, for example, for Boliden and LKAB. When I discuss with them, they highlight especially the framework directive of water. But of course, we have heard here about the some issues, which also can be problematic, especially dealing with the third and fourth capital mental code.
Sorry, that was my bad. I stepped on the cable. Go back.
Yes. So even if we move the Natura 2000 issues from the concessions permit, you might need to do some more changes into the system. And some of this is very difficult because it's related to the EU legislation. And it's not only this inquiry which is ongoing. It's important to see actually that it's several of them that we have for the mental side. I work for the first one here. With this one, sustainable supply of innovation critical metals and minerals. But you also have a mental side, two ongoing very interesting inquiries. One related to the mental permit process, which, for example, we look into the court and how they can do process management, because they're supposed to have process management and help the applicants and the agencies and give guidance on how this will work and give timelines and so forth. They're supposed to, but it's not always working today. So they will look into this topic, and we have another one which is related to climate measures, which, for example, will look into how we can include climate benefits into a permit system in the mental law. That actually that you can have to compare the local mental impact against the climate benefits from these projects. So it's not only the negative side, you have to also include the positive side. But then you also can go back actually to the EU legislation. It's very easy actually when you work with issues in practical way, that you go back what's required from the EU sides, because it's the legislation in EU level, because we must follow them. While if you just include this one, how should you actually include the climate benefits in this discussion? But of course, this can change the whole setting, that you actually include the business, the benefits on the business and the climate benefits into the process, and you have to actually at least discuss these issues, and it gets more difficult to be against without discussing these benefits at least. And this relates also what I'm trying to do now with a few colleagues, is to also look at the benefits, but not only the climate benefits, because we have a different inquiry here, but also how we can include the benefits, for example, work positions, social benefits, benefits that you have a new product which creates demand for more schools and infrastructure and in regions in Sweden. But also benefits that we create mining cluster which is working, which we have in Sweden, which we can continue to have in Sweden. And how we can include this better into the permit process. Because today it's very focused on mental side. Both on the country administrative board is very focused on the mental issues, but also we have many agencies focused on the mental and protecting issues, and not working with explorations. But we will also, in this inquiry, look into the local acceptance of how we can increase it. And most of the time, actually, it's related, if you look into this issue, it's mostly related to the dialogue between the companies and the local society, and how you can improve that. And most of the time, it actually works, but not always. And it can be from the both sides. And we also look into the whole mining act to see how we can improve and be more effective. And I also need to mention that we are not allowed to decrease the attractiveness of mining. Sometimes I say it's almost impossible to not achieve that, because it can't be worse. Probably it can. So that is rather easy to achieve, but we can't either increase the total tax burden, or in our inquiry, we are not allowed to look into the court organization. So we will be finished in October next year, so it will take some time before we have legislation in change. But in the same time, many of these issues we deal in Sweden today is also related to the culture in agencies and in the government and in the court. And this is things which is very difficult to handle, but it can also be driven much faster, because you don't need to change the law. You need to put pressure and work in the instruction and the regleringsbrev to these agencies, and how shall they actually participate in this process. So that's a much faster process, actually. And I have finished there, so thank you for your attention. If you want to contact me and give me recommendations what we can include and so forth, so please do so.
Thank you, Tobias.